Okay. Okay. HaMitzvah HaTishim. Hi shetzivonu lisroif chodshim shenitmu. Mitzvos Aseh chodshim shenitmu. I guess it's not dafka bosa chodshim, it's all chodshim. V'omer yis'aleh v'abosha sheyiga b'chol tomei lo yeochel b'eish yisarev. The Ram also in Perek Tes v'chostul mukdoshim v'potei HaMitzvos he writes kodshim stam. And l'cheira the kavana is to include also menachos. However, in Hilchos Tzur Mukdoshim, in Perek Tes Halacha Yud, when he says Elu Heina Nisrofim, which is not really referring to the mitzvah, it's just a list of Nisrofim. He says, Bosa Koch Koile Shenitmo Oy Noisa Oy Nifsa V'chein Mincha Shenitmes Oy Nifsa Oy Noisa. L'cheira, that's really relevant, and since the list of those things which are Machayiv Schreifa, but it's not a discussion of the mitzvah, so distinguishing Bosa and Mincha l'cheira is irrelevant. However, in Minyan HaKotze is a little odd, because he says, Lisroif Bosa Kodesh Shenitmo. Shenemar Bosa Shiga B'chol Tomei Lo Yochel B'eish Yisarev. So the truth is, if you look at the Pasuk, it says, V'abosa Asher Yiga B'chol Tomei Lo Yochel B'eish Yisarev. And maybe the proper approach is the way the Rambam is reflecting it in the Minyan HaKotze. Now, next step. This V'abos Hashiga B'chol Tomei B'eish Yisrael Lo Yochel B'eish Yisrael is in the parsha of Zevach Shlomim. Ba'bos Hashiga B'chol Tomei. I'm reading to you in Vayikra. In Parsha Sav, Ba'bos Hashiga B'chol Tomei Lo Yochel B'eish Yisrael Ba'bos Kol Torah Al Yochel Bosa Va'nefesh Toichel Bosa Mizevach Shlomim Asher Hashem V'tumos Le'olah V'nichos Ha'nefesh Ahi Me'amel. So the pasuk says Bosa, and it's the Pasha Bosa Shlomim. And maybe she's just the opposite. Maybe instead of a mitzvah of referring to all kodshim, maybe it should actually refer only to Shlomim. Or even if it and in Shlomim, maybe you should look at it as part of Chelkei HaMitzvah. That the same way, and we know that Chelkei HaMitzvah, what the Rambam formulates in Shurish Yud Beis, that if I have a Seder of many Pu'ulos, it merge into one long performance, like Maisa Oila, Maisa Chatos, Maisa Oshon, and Maisa Zevach HaShlomim, all the component parts are considered one long mitzvah. And the Ram says it doesn't end with the Akrova. That's why he has in the Seder Chatos Mikush Tifa, which is certainly after the Akrova. It's the cleaning of the Kalim that you ate the Kodshim with. So maybe the same way we should look at maybe that the same way that you can imagine that the Achilas HaShlomim, the Achilas HaBailim, which is not the Kohen, doesn't fall into pay test, should go under the mitzvah of Zevach HaShlomim, and the din is that if the boss is nitma, it all should go under Torah Zevach HaShlomim. So a priori, that's what we should have said. But as we know before, and the Rambam also does it. You see, when he talks about Nisrofim is one thing. But when he talks about it in the beginning of Perek Yutes, Mitzvos Aseh Lisloif Kol HaKadoshim Shenitmu Shenema V'Abos HaShiyitva Ashiyiga B'chol Tamei Lo Yochel B'Eish Yisaref. So the Rambam seems to understand that even though it's in the Parasha of Shlomim, it's not Chelkei HaMitzvah, but it's a separate mitzvah. And he proves it from a Gemara in Shabbos, that the Gemara calls Sefer Kochim of Tmeim Aseh. And Ein Aseh Derech Aseh V'lo. So we'll come to that. See, here is a very interesting question. Looking at the psukim, you could have said that it's part of the Seder Shlomim. The Matiki Ashmua say that it's a separate mitzvah. So what does that mean? Does that by itself enough to say that it's noig in kol hakochim? Or maybe this chelik mitzvah should be a mitzvah, and that's enough. And l'chayr, we have no proof about anything. I was only wondering, more so because you look at the Lashon, you see, the Lashon of the Talmud in the Gemara in Shabbos, Gemara Shabbos, Bo levaya atam sheba'avur osa lahadlik b'shem and truma shenitma b'yontif v'omeru b'zeh Shabbos and aseh v'yontif aseh v'lois aseh v'ein aseh derech lois aseh v'aseh v'yin zeh amaymo she'asis melacha b'yontif osa v'oisa isa oiva al mitzvos aseh shehu bitol Mitzvos Aseh, v'amrei b'yontiv yeh lochem Shabboson v'oiver al Mitzvos Aseh ki osa ma shehuzu imenu v'amr kol meloch Yosef kloima b'yontiv, that's meloch on yontiv usreifas kochim tmeim omnom Mitzvos Aseh, or as Kapach says, Ein o ela mitzvah aseh, so it's an ein aseh, derech aseh v'lois aseh. So when the Matiki Ashmua frame this mitzvah, they don't say that it's bosa kochim, they say that it's kochim shenitmu. So maybe we should derive from them not only this has come completely out of the purview of Shlomim. It happens to be in the parasha of Shlomim, but it's a mitzvah of Sreifas Kol Kochim Shenitmu. And in fact, a priori, the Rambam should have put this together with all the mitzvahs, with an exception in Shiur Beis, that the mitzvah noyim kol hakochim are separate mitzvahs. You could have done it. See, what I want to deal with, and we'll have to deal with later, whether you should come to conclusions that, because the Pasuk says, Vabosa sheyiga b'chol tomei lo yecho beish yisaref. So there's a relationship maybe between a bosa, which you'll be an isachila by, and bo'esh yisaref the chiv sreifa. However, even if you suggest this relationship, we don't know that the isachila is beyond bosa shlomim, because there's a bosa. So I think the best argument you can make is, since the Chachmei HaMeseira said kochim tmeim and said it's stam. Interesting. Rav Sadiq flips the whole thing. Rav Sadiq in Perek Yutes, Omid 180 to 181, VaMitzvah ho'aboyim v'sholosh kol dovo min hakadoshim shenitmo eino ne'achal oimloi v'abosa sheyiga b'chol tomei lo yachal beish yisaref. Over Piyut, in the Piyut, he says l'kodesh shenitmo lo yochal. Ubas hois, he says, Ubosa Kodesh bitomo lisroif tafrid. However, if you look there, here, there's a very important thing happening. And he, Rav Saadia, will see. You could have imagined he did it, but he didn't do it. He could have said, this is a mitzvah only, but he says, Kol dova min hakochim sheditmo. He does it exactly the Ram does it. And we'll see by Noisa for some reason he doesn't do that. We'll see that later. But the question is, so again, everyone, prepare echod, it's kochim sheditmo. Even though he could have said, it's part of a Teres HaShlomim. But if you look in Rav Sadiq, he doesn't have a separate mitzvah sreifa. He says, "Va mitzvah boyim b'sholosh kol dover min hakadoshim shenitmo eino ne'achal oimer abosa sheyiga b'chol tomei lo ye'ochel v'eish yisorev." So you get the impression the chiv sreifa is not a separate din, but it's a function of the Yisachila. And the Piyut, that's what he says, L'kodesh im nitmo lo ye'ochel. And then, in the Ashois, he does the opposite, only talks about the Sreifa, not the Yisachila. Ubosa kodesh bitomoy lisroif tafrid. So here, I could have imagined that it's of Sadi l'shitosai, that he doesn't differentiate between aseh v'lois aseh, but if the aseh and the lois aseh of the mirror of each other, then it's counted as one mitzvah. And he learns that the isa achila and the chiv sreifa is the same. That which is also b'achila is mechayiv sreifa. That which is mechayiv sreifa is also b'achila. We're not sure which way it goes. It might depend upon diukim between the asholis and the piyut. what's going on over here, but it's all one mitzvah, and the Ram counts it as two separate mitzvahs. Okay. Next. Now, here, we have to just look at the things going on here that are very strange. Okay? Let's go back. V'omer Yisrael v'abos hashiga b'chol tomei lo yochel b'eish Yisrael. Ugmo Shabbos bo'u levaya tam sheba'avur osel lahadlik b'shem truma shenit b'yontif. Shem truma is coming here out of nowhere, and the Ram explaining the context of the Gemara on Shabbos. The Gemara is explaining why it's also to be seiref shemen truma on Shabbos. Shemen truma tmeya on Shabbos. And Yontif Shabbos, and in Yontif also. So the Omroi Shabbos, there's an Aseh and a Lois Aseh. And Yontif is an Aseh and a Lois Aseh. And Sreifas Kochim is an Aseh. Usreifas Kochim Tmeim on the Mihi Mitzvos Aseh. L'chein eno muto also Lisreif Oise B'Yontif. Ba'abu Shorish Ezocho ein Aseh Doich Aseh V'Lois Aseh. So if the Matiki Ashmua say ein Aseh Doich Aseh V'Lois Aseh, it's a raya that it's a Mitzvos Aseh. Okay? And that's what it's proving. V'sham gam kein omru maima ze l'shoinoi. They said a maima ze l'shoinoi. Kishem shemitzvah lisroif kochin shenitmo kach mitzvah lisroif shemen truma shenitmo. And this is referring to even b'chol. And there's a mitzvah. And it says again that Sreifas Kochim is a mitzvah. It's not just the din that since Yisrael know it should have Sreifa, but there's a mitzvah same in your mitzvahs. And this is the Ram quotes. So again, since the Matiki Ashmur used the word mitzvah, and they are responsible for the Messiah of Tayag mitzvahs, the fact they use the word mitzvah is a raya that it's a mitzvah in Minyan mitzvahs. Here comes a very difficult thing. True, there is a mitzvah of Sreifas Kochim Tmeim, which is the Ram here is trying to present. And looking at this Maimah, there is an equivalency relationship between Kochim Tmeim and Truma Tmeim. Kishen Shemitzvah Lisref Kochim Shenitmu, Kach Mitzvah Lisref Shem and Truma Shenitmu. Correct? If there's such a relationship, so then you have a very strange thing. So you either have to conclude that Sreifas Truma is a separate mitzvah, minyan mitzvahs, like Kochim Shenitmu, or Shemen, or the same way, there's no mitzvah to be serif Shemen Truma, there's no mitzvah to be serif Kochim Shenitmu. Okay. So the amazing thing is that the Rambam, who's quoting this proof, counts Kochim Shenitmu in Minyan HaMitzvos, Sreifas Kochim Shenitmu, but Schreifas Truma Tmeya is not Minyan HaMitzvos. And the reason why I would have assumed is what Rebbe always said, in Igus Agrid and Perigid Aleph, it was Trumos, Malacha Yudches, that the Schreifas Truma Shenitmu is the Kiyum of the Tush's Truma. It's the Chefs of Truma's Machayev. But there's no separate, it's a din in that the Nitan, the Tush's Truma is Nitan, the state Truma is Akosa Medaber. We Omer Teira, B'Shas Biur, Tihanim Imen, that's a heter. Heichen Omer Teira, mit der Rav Yad Nachman, Bar di Omer Rav Nachman, Omer Rabba Abuo, Omer Kro, Vani, Hine Nesati Lecho, Es Mishmeres Trumosai, B'Shtei Trumas Akosa Medaber, Achas Truma Teira, Ve'achas Truma Tmeya, the Omer Achmono, Lecho Shelecho Tehei La'asika Tachas Tavshilcha. So, L'cheira, the Ram doesn't count it, and with the Rav's explanation, that's what should come out. Schreifas Truma is not a Truma Tmei, is not a mitzvah Minyan HaMitzvos. So how could the Ram quote Kishem Shemitzvah Lisreif Kochim Shenitmu Kach Mitzvah Lisreif Shemen Truma Shenitmu? And it's not only a problem here, but it's a problem in general. Once Chazal could use the word mitzvah, and it doesn't mean a mitzvah, mitzvahs, so then what's the proof? And this l'cheira is very difficult. See, I just want to suggest something, but I'm going to suggest it, and we'll see. I'm not sure I'm going to suggest it, let's put it like that. We know before, and it could be the Ram put it here because of that, the mitzvah peites, the mitzvah achilas truma has somehow a Shem Kodesh in it, and I assume what's happening is not only when you eat the truma, that it's nigreres HaMitzvah, besides the kiyumei truma, there's a kiyumei kodesh, because va'avodas matana etenes kunaschem, that avoida avadati esmol avadati avodas hamikdash. So in achilas truma, it's kodesh hamikdash. I'm just only wondering, and I say with trepidation, is it possible that even though that there is a din, a kiyum and chefsa of b'shtei trumas hakosa b'daba, achas truma tahir v'achas truma tmeya, la'asika tachas tavshilcha. However, maybe they also, it's mitzurah to the kiyum of Sreifas Kochim Tmeim, because it's called Kodesh Shenitmo, and it's the same Kodesh, the Achila is Nigra HaMitzvah from Mikdash. Question is, it's such a thing possible. However, if you're ready to accept that, then the Gemara is, let's say, a lot more understandable, because the Ram starts off like this, and the Gemara starts like Vabos Hashiga B'chol Tomei, Mo Shabbos, bo levaya atam shebavurei osad lahadlik b'shem and truma shenitma b'yontiv. So we know about Shem and Truma. So what? So what's the relation? The Gemara, my time the Gemara says, because also this of Kochim B'yontiv. And the three pshatim. And Ravashi at the end says that Vash is like this. Ravashi says that Yontiv is an Aseh because it's because the also list of Kochim B'yontiv, but the Gemara doesn't come back and discuss Truma. So the question is, maybe when the Gemara discussed Kodesh, it was a discussion also of Truma, and that the Aseh also applies by Truma. I think it's very difficult to say. But on the other hand, the Kshem Shemitzvos of Kochim Shenitmo, Kach Mitzvos of Shem and Truma Shenitmo is amazingly difficult. And I'll leave you with that. Now, Mitzvos Sadi Aleph. A mitzvah ha'achas v'tishim hi shetzivonu lisroif noisa. The mitzvah is formulated sreifas noisa. Here, l'cheira, the Ram writes it stam. It's a priori all kodesh. They after Zman Achilasai. And that's what he says. Vom Yis'al Rabosa Mibsar Zevach B'yom HaShlish B'Eish Yisaref V'bei Omo Yis'al B'keves HaPesach applies to the Korban Pesach. Those are Sirim and Arboika, but they see Menu Arboika B'Eish Yisaref. Omo Mechilta Bo HaKos Alita Nasei Alois Aseh. U'Mekoy Misrabim B'Sochim. They say that it's a lav, the noise lav shnita laseh. First of all, the parsha of Noisa in Parsha Sav is also in Parsha Shlomo. And there, Rav Sadi Goin does what we would expect him to do. And he says that the mitzvah of the, he doesn't talk about the mitzvah sreif, he talks about the Isa Achila. The Isa Achila of Noisa is only by Shlomim and Toida. So he says, like this. Holish ve'osa lecho ma'anis mizevach ha'toida b'yom ha'sheni u'me'ashlom b'yom ha'shlishi ka'oimoi legabe ha'yom ha'rishon u'b'sar zevach shlom. And he says basically the lav is only by noisa, noisa of shlomim and Toida. What happens to Pesach? I have no clue. Okay, but that's what he does. So you understand yourself that if you limit Noisa to Shlomim and Teda, and Tomei applies to all Kochim, so then you don't have a problem. What problem don't you have? The question is, why say it's two? Say that it's only one mitzvah, and the mitzvah is Sreifas Ksur Mekdoshim, and two examples are Noisa and Tomei. So according to Absadia, it's not a big problem because I'm not clear at all that the mitzvah of Sreifas, I don't know if there's a mitzvah Sreifas Noisa, but the whole issue of Noisa is only in Bosa Shlomim and Zevach Torah. But according to the Rambam, that both of them, both Tomei and Noisa, but all Kodesh, it's a problem. So you tell me, Mechetese, if the mitzvah is all Psur Mekdoshim, so you say that maybe Tomei and Noisa is one. But if the mitzvah is Tomei and Noisa, so then it's certainly different. Or maybe different. But especially if you say that the Chiv Sreifa is a function of the Isa Achila, and they're two separate lavim in Minyan HaMitzvos of Tomei and Noisa, so then maybe we have no problem. If you look in Minyan HaMitzvos, you have Uf Lamed Shizhalnu Milecho Bosa Kochish Nitmu, and Kuf Lamed Aleph is Ashol Milecho Es Anoisa. So okay. So maybe that's the reason. But the interesting thing is, the Rambam doesn't quote that. The Rambam seems to say, there's an assay on loisase. What does it mean? Liteid assay aloisase. Mekoimis rabbi mipsochim umakis amru bebeyo ki lo lav denoisa lav shenita klasehu. Then he says, which I have no clue what that means, because the fact that your loika, not loika, is irrelevant, because we're talking on Mitzvos Aseh. We want to learn from the lav shenita klaseh, because the Matiki Hashmua says it's nita klaseh, there's an aseh here. For asehu, mashe zachanu, v'anoisim mimenu, ad boike b'eish tisreifu. So the question is, the Ram seems to be proving from the fact that it's a lava nitak laseh that that's enough. So what does that mean? That means that just the Mitzvos Aseh, and we know ourselves that it's a separate mitzvah? Or lav hanitak laseh means that the lav requires a peculiar aseh to menatkai. And the fact that it's in the Chazal, the Matiki Hashmua, say that it's nitak laseh, that is an edus for the Matiki Hashmua that it's an aseh miyuchad for this lav. And if it's an aseh miyuchad for the lav of achilas noisan, of the lav of to be moiser, the korban pesach loisisil men adboiker, so then it's a very peculiar aseh, and it only applies to this case. But that l'chayra is logically impossible to say. Because Rebbeinu Shalom, doesn't the Rambam over here apply the Aseh not only to Korban Pesach? Or let's even leave it to Korban Pesach. Rebbeinu Shalom, in Korban Pesach, there are two lavim of Lo Yisiru Mimenu. Lo Yisiru. There's one lav by Pesach Rishon, and there's one lav by Pesach Sheni. And that's Lo Yisir Kuf Yud Tes, Shelo Hisir Mebisara Pesach in Kuf Yud Zayin, Shelo Hisir Mebisara Pesach, Shem Lo Yisiru Mimenu Aboiker. And Kuf Yud Tes, Shelo Hisir Mebisara Pesach Sheni, Aboiker, Shem Lo Yisiru Mimenu Aboiker. So what you have is one aseh, which is menatek two separate lavim, Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, and it's one aseh in HaMitzvos. So l'chera, there is no such concept that every lav requires a peculiar aseh, and the best you can do from lav and nitul aseh that there is such an aseh. Okay. We have no raya that it's a specific assay about this case. And that's exactly what's happening over here, because the Rambam says the assay is not only by Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, but the assay of Sreifa is in all Noisar. Okay. So then we're confused exactly. How do we know that it's a separate mitzvah? So let's assume that this is only by Noisar and the other one is only by Tomei, and that itself is enough. Maybe. Before we go on, there are two problems over here. Because if you recall, the Rambam has one pasuk and learns many mitzvahs from it. The word Tazoi is written in the Torah, and the Rambam learns the same Tazoi, Peya, Leket, Oilois, Peret. Okay, we'll see. And if you look at the Rambam in Mitzvos in Kuf Chav, he says, "Va mitzvah Kuf Chav, v'ish tzivor al niach peya min atchvur v'ilonis v'adoim lehem v'omer yis'aleh tazeh v'yisol acha zochrei apeya v'nizbar v'mo makis shapeya hi lav shintik lasei halav omroi lo yischale pasotcho b'kutzrecho v'asei omroi tazeh v'yisol." So l'chayr, what it means, there's a separate assay of tazeh for peya, because since the lav is a lav of peya, it requires a nitak of peya. So l'chayr, you can't say that from here. I always assume that, because why is the Rambam talking about lav and nital assay in the Mitzvos Aseh? If you're talking about the Lois Aseh, you're telling us that there's no Malchus. And that's an issue of Lois Aseh. But here he's telling us it's right, it's Mitzvos Aseh. He's just proving the Tazov is a Mitzvos Aseh. And how do we know there's a separate Tazov by pay? It's the same word. And he does it again in Kuf Chav Aleph. He's just Yivon al Niach HaLeket, Vom Yis'alev, V'leket Tzilcho, Loisalake, Lon V'ageh Tazov Yisam. Who gam kain lav shenitel laseh, kmo she's boy al pei meseches makis. So l'cheira, the reason why pei and leket it's the same tazov are two separate mitzvahs because lav and laseh. But we don't know what you can prove from lav and laseh because you don't require peculiar aseh for each lav. You know nothing. Similarly, you have the same problem by Gzela. The Heshiv is a Gzela, contrary to popular interpretation. If everyone would ask, what's a classical example of Mitzvos Aseh? Oh, the Heshiv is Gzela Shegosa. No. There's no problem. It's very simple. It's not so simple. Because you look, Heshiv Gzela is in the parsha of Oshem Vadai. And it's the parsha of Shavuos Bikodan. And the Torah says after the person is moida that he did it, and he was nishpa b'sheker, so it's Pashas Sipur. He does this, and then he brings the Osher. So the fact that Chazal say that Gzeil is a Nitik say, we prove that the Veheshiv is a mitzvah. Okay? We prove that it's a mitzvah. However, we prove that it's a mitzvah. However, what is the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah a mitzvah of Hashavas Gzeila? Or is the mitzvah a mitzvah of Hashavas Oshek and Pikodoin and Tzumas Yad and Aveda? So the Chayra, it's everything. However, there's a problem because the Rambam says in Kufsari Dalid, in Aseh Kufsari Dahichi Zivono Lohoshev is a Gzeila Bi'atzmo. Im hi nisheres ba'atzmo v'tisefes chomesh oy lo says domeo in nishtanis v'om yis'ala v'heshiv Gzeila shogozal. He quotes the Heshiv for peculiar dinim, not only for the Etzem HaShovas HaGzeila, not only for the Tisefes Chomesh, but for the HaShovas HaGzeila and the Chomesh. The Hashov from the Etzem HaGzeila, the Tisefes Chomesh, or Losses Domeim Nishtanis. So the Chayra, and this is a separate mitzvah called HaShovas HaGzeila. And the Ram quotes the Raya, Kvar Biru, Meseches Macha Shelav the Gezel, Hu Lashik Lasei. V'om Rachmona, the Omru, Rachmona Oma Loisigzal, Veishel Gzela Shegozal. So again, Lashik Lasei proves it's something specific. Well, if it's something specific, I don't understand how this Aseh could apply in so many different cases. You see, the kasha it is true that there's a separate assay by each individual case of Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. But you don't count it as a separate mitzvah minyan mitzvah. You count it as one mitzvah. So it means that the nituk doesn't require peculiar aseh. So I just don't get it. Let's go on. Then he says like this. V'din hapigol v'hanoisa shovim. Kmo she'evaye b'mitzvos loisa, so we'll have to see which one he's referring to. Kikva hoitzi hapigol b'mila noisa. B'mila noisa means, or b'losha noisa. Ukfa his boye dine mitzvah zu gam kein bipsochim v'seif tmura. Okay. See here, if you say that the Aseh is not for all Psula Mukdashim, it's just for Noisa and for Pigul Noisa, so then a priori there's no necessity to ask the question of why Sreifas Kochiv Shenitma'u and Sreifas Noisa should be one mitzvah. If the mitzvah includes all Psula Mikdashim, so then I assume that it could be one mitzvah. So in Minyan HaMitzvos is okay, because he only says that Pigul and Noisa is included. However, and so it's not only in Minyan HaMitzvos, in Minyan HaKotzeh and the Protei Mitzvahs, the mitzvah is only Sreifas Noisa. And here he's Moisif, Shedina Noisa Pigul Ein Shoven. Kmo Shevaya B'mitzvah Loisas. Okay. However, so then you can say that the Isa Achila of Pigul and Noisa is the same, and the Sreifa has to do with Isa Achila, and it's not the same Isa Achila as Tomei, so Mela it's a different mitzvah of Sreifa. And Voraya, that the din Sreifa by Pigul is the same as by Noisa, and it requires Sreifa only by Yom. And that's the Ram says in Perek Yutes of Hilchos Mukdashim Alocha Dalet in Hay. Ein sof min es hanoisa ela b'yoyim. Shna b'yoyim hashlishi beis Yisrael. Af al pi shashlomim asuim b'achila mitchilas leil shlishi. Ein sof hanoisa ela b'yoyim. Vein bizman vein shloi bizman. V'chein pigul ein hanoisa ela b'yoyim. So this is all very nice. So it's a separate din sreifa. It requires yoyim. In sreifa's tamei, it doesn't require yoyim. So it's two separate mitzvahs. The problem only is in the beginning of Psul Mukdashim. The Ram does something amazing. Not only is Ram does something amazing. He does like this. He says, V'chein hanoisa perek yutes aloch alef Mitzvos Aseh l'sofoi shnema v'hanoisa mibsar hazevach b'yoyim hashlishi b'eish Yisrael ubichlal hanoisa hapigo b'chol psuli hamukdoshim hakol nisrofin. See here, it's very strange, because he says "B'chlal hanoisa hapigo v'chol psul mukdashim." So, in general, if you remember, we have rayas from in many places that B'chlal is only a drasha and it's not pashti d'kla. So maybe it's not the Ika mitzvah, it's like Simchas Yontiv, that the mitzvah Simchas Yontiv is Basa Kochim in Hilchos Chagiga, and in Psach in Hilchos Yontiv, he says that the B'chal mitzvah is called Dov Mesamchoy. You have a similar thing in Agudis Agudais, that there's a lot of Kolcha, and there's Malchus. But the Ram says that's Pasha the Kla, but Agudis Agudais is only a drasha, and that's B'chlal, the Ram says. What the Minchas Chinuch does is an amazing thing. He is almost like Chalifa Pumpadisa, and I understand why he should do this. Because the Rambam in Minyan HaMitzvos says that Pigul Noisa Hainu Hach. So Pigul Noisa Hainu Hach, you would assume that Pigul is part of the Ika mitzvah. And it's only by Pigo there's a mitzvah sefer by Yoim. Not by other psul mukdashim, that the Ram says clearly in Perek Zayin of Hilchos Ma'aser Karbonos Halacha Hey, uschreifas kol nisrafim kshela bezar b'layla. So that includes everything except for Pigul and Noisa, where it says Dafka B'Yoyim. So comes the Minchas Chinuch in Mitzvah Kuf Mem Gimel Ois Aleph and says like this: Umuvur b'Keitzat Tzolin the Kol Psul Mukdoshim Gomer Gemire Lanu the B'Schreifer V'nei HaRambam V'av Mechaber Koser B'Chlal HaNoisa Hu Pigo V'achach Kosvu the Chol Psul Mukdoshim B'Chlal Nira the Pigo Hu Kimufurish Batera the Hu B'Chlal Noisa. So it means that he moves B'Chlal HaPigo HaNoisa HaPigo and then Kama. And that's more than B'Chal, that's mamish it. B'chol psul mukdashim hakol nisraf. And he says, and he continues, and the nafkamina is that shvul abatal HaMitzvah, and nafkamina le'in shvul hanishba shaloi yisroif, oshi yisrof, ein yodei reish lametches reish lametes, the alasei eno chal, the aldova shenem mufurish bater chal, ve'in tzorch laharich. So as far as the Gomer Gemir Psul Mukdashim will be Chal, and not for Pigul and Noisa. That's what he says. It's an amazing thing. But L'cheira, there's no way out of it unless you say the Ram disagrees with what he said, Mishnah Torah, and here in Sefer HaMitzvos, and then you have a problem. You can say you disagree, but why there should be Sreifim by Yoim, by Pigo, as opposed to all of the Psulim Mukdoshim. Now, what happens here also is Sreifas Psulim Mukdoshim is a Gomer Gemira. But it's, and that's the Gemara Pesachim on Pei Beis and Beis. Hashid the Amina Kol Psul the Kodesh B'Sreifa Lo Yishno the Kodesh Kochim Lo Yishno the Kochim Kalim Gomer Gemira. So the emes is sometimes Gomer Gemira is a Pirush Makobel from Moshe Rabbeinu. For example, I assume when the Gemara said Gomer Gemira by Benecha, the Ram says like this: that Kohen Oriel she'ovad chayiv malchus v'chil avodah. He's chayiv malchus. Where's the lav? The Ram says in B'yis Hamikdash, Ha'oriel ha'yuke Benecha shleima kol al kol Benecha al lei ve'al bosa. That's a posting Yecheskel. Lefikach Oriel she'ovad chilil avoidosai v'loike gezah she'ovad. Aval eno chayiv misas. The only way it could be is a pirush makubal, because you can't get malchus for a Kabbalah from a Yecheskel. Okay, and the Gemara Tiny says, on Yud Zayin Beis, Hod the Omer of Chista, Dov Zeh Mitois Moshe Ben Lamadnu B'Divrei Kabbalah Lamadnu Kol Benecha Al Lei Ve'Al Bosa Lo Yovel HaMikdoshi Homekayim Dosi Cheskel Man Omer El Gomer Gemira. So there L'chor means a Pirush Makubal. V'Yosi Cheskel V'Asrei Akor. Okay. So I would assume that not all Gomer Gemiras are the same, according to the Rambam. And the Rambam doesn't learn this Derech Agav, doesn't learn Gomer Gemira is Halachah Mishmisina like Rashi. And for example, the Gomer Gemira by Chatzinez Xroyes is Halachah Mishmisina. But it's a Kabbalah, but it's not a Raya that it's a Pirush Makubal. Because L'cheira, it becomes a little bit odd if you're going to say that that the Kol Psul Mukdashim or Pirush Makubal, so then you ask yourself, the line between Psulim Mukdashim and Noisim Pilul becomes very thin, and we know what we're talking about. That's where we're standing. We don't know. We just have various guidelines to guide us. And even more confusing, the Gemara in Pesachim says it's Gomer Gemira. But there's a Sifra about it. The Sifra in Parsha Sav, Parsha and Tes, Sefer Yud Gimel Ochadalid, Ainli Elanoisa, Minayin Nishcha Balayla, Nishpach Domo, Shot Chutz Lekloyim, Valon Vayetz Nishchat, Chutz Zman, Chutz Lekloyim, Shkibul Psulim, V'zok Es Domo, V'chulei, 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 Miton V'chutz, V'pesa, V'chatas, V'shot, V'shmon, V'chulei, all these Kochim Tmeim, Kochim Psulim. What is it? Tamaloi Maloye Ochel Ki Kodesh Heim. Kol Shu Kodesh Ton Sefer. So you have a problem. We know the Ram Shita is B'derech Klal that Stam Sefer is a Pirush Mekubal. So the question is, can you actually machalik between Psulim Mukdashim and Pigul and Noisam? Then you have a pasuk. The question is, where does Sifra learn the Sefer of Psulim Mukdashim? The drasha of the Sifra of the Sefer Psulim Mukdashim is Mabosa Shiyiga B'chol Tomei Lo Yeochel Be'esh Yisrael. Mabosa Kol Tor Yochal Bosa. That pasuk. Because it says, Tamulon Maloye Ochel Kodesh Ki Kodesh Hein. Because it says, Lo Ye Ochel, Lo Ye Ochel Bo'esh Yisaref. So the Bo'esh Yisaref, Eli Alaton Schrefer Latome Vanoisa, Bos Vanoisa, B'shel Shlomim, B'chata Shenichnas Kol Doma Lefnim, Minayin L'Abbas Kol Noisa, V'chulei. So this, Mimalba, the whole Ribui, is under Bo'esh Yisaref. So the chayre is a pirush makubal, and you come down to the same thing. So it's not clear how you machalik between psulim mukdashim and other kochim. And even worse than that, the question is what's going on. Lo yachal be'esh yisaref, ainly ton schreif el tomei v'anoisa b'shel shlomim, and then it puts everything else, and then the line between tomei and noisa becomes very blurred. Now, okay, I think we'll have to just one short note, and then we'll see. The Aschora over here, the Minchas Chinuch says that the Mitzvos Aseh, the Chinuch, sorry, the Mitzvos Aseh is not noig bisman hazeh. And you have to ask yourself, it's true that all the Mitzvos Akovos Kochim are not noig, but if you makriv mafashening bias, if there is a Kodesh and it's Nitma, there's no Mitzvos Aseh. Now you have to ask yourself what the Chinuch would say. So Mitzvah Hashem will pick up next week, and have a good evening.